Hey everybody, welcome back to The Walking David. I'm going to be reviewing Season 1, Episode 5 of The Walking Dead. We start off this episode with Rick Grimes using his walkie-talkie to try to communicate with Morgan, but Rick is attempting to keep to his promise to call him every single day at dawn to let him know his progress. And he lets him know that he found his family, although he couldn't believe it. Rick has kind of an epic line. I mean, it doesn't seem too epic at the time, but I love the line where he goes, "The city is not safe. It belongs to the dead now." And it's a great scene. It really is. It's beautifully shot. I love it. Andrea's sister, Amy, is dead. Officially dead. And Andrea decides to wait to the very last minute to put an end to Amy. In this episode, we also see how the group grieves after the losses that they suffered at the campsite. We see a lot of emotion come out of Glenn because Daryl and another one of the people at the campsite are dragging bodies over to this fire because they're throwing all the walkers on the fire. But Glenn makes a very profound statement saying, "We don't burn them. These were our friends. We knew these people. We bury them. Whether they got bit or not, they're not going to be treated like a walker. They're going to have to be put down, yes, bullet in the head just like everything else, but we're going to bury them properly." Jackie notices that Jim was bit. Jim is starting to kind of get delirious and is already getting sick, because keep in mind he was bitten in the skirmish at the campsite hours ago. And so this has been kind of pumping through his body, and so he's very well on his way to turning and dying. And or flip those around, but either way, he's very close. The group, kind of in a panic, thinking that this area is not as safe as they thought because they kind of got cornered and they were lucky to get out with as few of losses as they had. They try to make a choice. Now it's either Fort Benning, which is Shane's idea, or it's the CDC, which Rick proposes. Because Rick says that the CDC would be open at any cost. At least the government, if it still stood, if there was any kind of governmental structure, the CDC would still exist for as long as they could. Shane's more concerned with artillery. He's like, Fort Benning would have a lot more guns and people, and we stand the best chance of survival there. So they have a disagreement. One thing I sort of wanted to bring up was how Rick mentions that before everything went to shit, he heard that the CDC was working on a cure. Now remember, he's been in a coma, unless if he heard something about a zombie-like plague that was happening before he went into a coma. Maybe he was coming in and out of consciousness. It's possible that Morgan explained to him what was going on. Because Morgan does say in the first episode, when he's referencing the walkers, he's like, about the dead people, right? And he goes, yeah, I saw a lot of that. And he goes, no, not the ones they put down, they being the government, the ones they didn't. And maybe they had a discussion over dinner about the CDC. I don't know. Daryl is very definitive when it comes to people getting bit, at least at the very beginning when we see him. He wants to just kind of put an end to Jim, put an axe in his skull, and the same with Amy. He's like, we got to be done with this stuff, otherwise they're just ticking time bombs waiting to attack the group when we're already weak. I mean, that's not an incorrect statement what he's saying, but Rick ends up laying down the law and says, we don't kill the living. Find out it's Amy's birthday. Nobody cares. One thing I think is crucial about this episode for all the people who are currently caught up on The Walking Dead is that Carol picks up a pickaxe that Daryl was using to put down all the walkers and puts down her own husband, Ed. And she's doing it and she's crying, but each time she swings the pickaxe, she gets better at it and it gets easier for her. And she's kind of choosing to confront her grieving rather than avoid it. And she chose to not take the easy way out and chose to do it herself. And I think that says a lot about Carol. And I can't wait for everybody who is not caught up to see how she progresses. because that is a big tipping point for her. We see a lot of tension in this episode between Rick and Shane, a lot of disagreements. Shane wants to go to Fort Benning. Rick wants to go to the CDC. Shane thinks it's Rick's fault for leaving and them losing a lot of people. Rick thinks that he did the right thing because he needed the guns to protect the people. Rick tells Lori about Shane's disagreement with him, and unfortunately for Rick, he doesn't get what he deserves, and Lori almost agrees with Shane. And I think that sticks in Rick's craw quite a bit. I think that's hard for him to shake because he already feels tremendous guilt about the fact that he left and this stuff happened, and now, nobody is sugarcoating it. They're kind of like, yeah, you shouldn't have left. And I disagree with him. I think he should have left and gotten the guns and did what he did. And I think we're meant to feel that as the audience. We're meant to feel like Rick and going like, why are you blaming me for doing what I thought was the best move for us? I would never have made a move if it wasn't intended to be the best solution. We see, Lori, like I said, disagrees with Rick about the CDC. Shane disagrees with Rick about the CDC. And just because Shane comes over and talks to Lori, you can feel this tension between them. Lori chooses to agree with Rick's gut in going to the CDC pretty much just out of guilt. She doesn't actually believe it's the right move. She just feels like, I need to stand by my husband even if he's making a bad choice. He's not, but it's like, it just shows that her opinion basically shouldn't even be counted. She's illogical. We see when they go hunting to go looking for food, Shane raise a gun to Rick, and Dale catches him in the act of doing that. And you see this look on Dale's face like he knows what kind of man Shane is, and it's like if he didn't know what was going on before between Rick and Shane and why there was so much tension, if they were best friends and ex-partners, now he does. He knows something's definitely up and that Shane cannot be trusted. I mean, Shane comes this close to shooting Rick. I mean, it's very obvious that he has to use all of his willpower to not do it. We're starting to unravel. Shane, just like Lori, out of guilt, chooses to follow Rick's decision to go to the CDC. Because Dale just saw Shane raise a gun at Rick, and Shane has to redeem himself, sort of, in Dale's eyes at least, so that Dale doesn't tell on him to the group and goes, you know what, I trust his instincts, let's just go to the CDC. And we see Morales and his family, they decide to go a separate way. They give him a gun and some ammo, off they go. Nobody really cares. Bye, Morales. Spoiler alert, you won't be seeing them again. Rick then walkie-talkies Morgan saying that they're going to the CDC, and if any kind of government is left standing, it would have to be there, don't you think? And he says, I left a map and a note behind, taped to a red car, so if for some reason you are listening and you can't respond, you know where we're going. Jim, one of my favorite characters from the first season, honestly. I think he's a little underrated. He's getting sicker and sicker. He's trying to talk to Rick, and he's starting to have kind of onset of hysteria and dementia and these flashes of him becoming a walker and all these terrible things. And he knows he's not going to make it to the CDC. He doesn't have very long. I mean, he's probably just minutes away from dying. And so he asks Rick to please let him die on the side of the road. He doesn't want to cause any problems. He doesn't want to be in more pain than he has to be in the trip in the RV, the bumpy roads and stuff. He just can't handle it. He's like, just let me die in peace. It's my choice, not your failure. And that's a powerful thing to say. And you can even see it in Rick's face that he kind of understands that. And he's like, I need to remember that for the next time this happens. I should never... If someone doesn't want to be saved, I'm not going to waste my time saving them. And this guy's telling me not to waste my time. I'll listen. We see footage from the CDC, which I've got to say was a great technique because, they're talking about going there. They're not sure if it's going to be safe or not. They don't know if CDC or Fort Benning is a better choice. And then, boom, we cut to the CDC and there's a person there. And we're introduced to Dr. Jenner. Now, here are some things, I wrote them down, that Dr. Jenner brings up. He says, it's been 194 days since Wildfire was declared, Operation Wildfire. and it's been 63 days since the disease went roughly global. A nugget of foreshadowing in this episode is we see Dr. Jenner is sort of like a microbiologist and a pathologist. Like, he's just kind of an overall scientist. And because he's the only one there at the CDC, so he kind of has to do everything. The object of the foreshadowing is when he's in his biohazard suit, he's going into a lab to do a gross. Now, a pathologist does a gross, and basically what a gross is, you take a slice of tissue, usually from like a tumor, maybe a black lung, anything like that, a piece of tissue from the human body that is believed to be infected. You put chemicals onto it, you take a chemical sample, you rub it and swab it onto a thin piece of glass, a slide, you pinch it, you put it underneath a microscope, and you watch its progress. You see how fast the disease spreads, or how fast the illness spreads, and just kind of the overall health of the person. Now, the tissue sample that he uses is called TS-19. Unfortunately, something goes wrong in the lab. He spills some chemicals that he was pouring onto the tissue sample, TS-19. It starts to burn through his biohazard suit, so he has to kind of go and take a quick chemical bath and get hosed down. And then the CDC, since it has these kind of precautions put in place, if personnel or a contamination on personnel is believed to be in the air, it will close the doors and do full decontamination, which basically means set the room on fire, burn everything in there, because then nothing could survive it. Dr. Jenner then says into a little webcam that he's been recording on for presumably 194 days, the TS-19 samples are gone. The tragedy of their loss cannot be overstated. Just keep that in mind, what their loss means. I mean, he's been by himself for hundreds of days and seen some probably pretty horrific things. And being at the CDC, he definitely knows things that other people don't know, and the burden of knowledge that he must have is probably immense. The group arrives at the CDC. They go up there, and it is just covered. The outside of the CDC is just littered with freshly decomposing bodies and government vehicles like tanks and Humvees and stuff like that, which shows that lots of people hoved to the CDC, just like the group did, and died in the process and weren't able to make it. Now, they're very close to the city, and that's dangerous because it's nighttime and a lot of walkers start roaming at night. We see Dr. Jenner, and he's talking to a computer, and he sees them, and it's like, in his mind, I think he has completely made up the decision that he doesn't want to live anymore, and he doesn't want the burden of anybody else's lives on his hands. And so when he sees the group, he just kind of says into the camera, like, just leave. Just get out of here. You know, like, I got nothing for you guys. Just go. We also see, simultaneously as he's saying that to himself, looking at the camera, we see Rick begging for mercy. He's saying that you're killing us. You gotta let us in. I know somebody's in there. Because he sees the camera move, and I mean, they're just about to give up hope entirely, and the door swings wide open. Here's the best part about that. This proves that Rick's choice to go to the CDC was valid, and sort of redeems him from possibly leaving the group at the campsite and them having some losses. If this CDC thing pans out, it was the right move all along. Really quick, the things that I loved about this episode were the fact that I didn't even think, when I was first watching this episode, that the CDC was an option. I didn't even think about that. I kind of hate myself for the fact that I didn't think about that. That's a very smart move on Robert Kirkman and the show's part, to choose to have them pursue something like that. I thought that was an incredibly smart move. I love the acting in this episode, aside from Andrea and Amy. I don't hate Andrea. I really don't. But this first season, she is mind-numbing. Okay? But the acting is on Shane's part of this kind of self-loathing but also possessiveness of Lori. Rick obviously does an amazing job of looking like bewildered. He can't believe his ears that people are actually about to blame him for leaving the campsite when he came back with the very thing that he said he was going to go get. I mean, he kept his promise. He said he'd come back. He did come back. He got the guns. I couldn't find Merle, but it's like they're turning against him. It's like he can't make the right decision. And at this time, I mean, your emotional stability is crucial. Keeping your wits about you. And to throw such an emotional curveball at Rick at such a crucial time when he has to have his head clear as can be was a terrible move on Lori and Shane's part. You know, listen to the guy. He's a sheriff, for Christ's sake. Dr. Jenner was an amazing cast. I think that guy is great. I loved him ever since I saw him in The Truman Show. I think he's phenomenal. They did their homework as far as the CDC and how they handle these outbreaks, the kind of equipment that they have, and the fact that he kind of lives in this underground bunker with an abundance of food. Because the CDC, I believe, don't quote me on it, but I think they have enough food and stuff stored for something like 50 years. Because assuming an atomic bomb was dropped, it has a 35 year radioactive effect. And so they need food and water and shelter that can survive an atomic blast and sustain a government. The fact that we see that Dr. Jenner is the only one alive sort of signifies that he saw a lot of people die. And not just people. The best of the best. Nobel Peace Prize, medical engineers, chemists, biologists, government officials who he might have even seen like a president or a vice president die. We don't know. But at the CDC, when the world is going to shit, he saw some crucial people to the human race die. And that must have been horrific. Thank you everybody for watching this review. I really enjoyed this episode. This is where The Walking Dead really starts to kick up and get really interesting. So keep watching the reviews. Thank you from here at The Walking David, and I'll see you next time. Peace.